We're really pleased to welcome you to the National Theater to meet Virginia's gubernatorial candidates. Thank you all for attending. Citizen engagement is absolutely critical to the Bay and our river's future. And special thanks to those elected officials who are here in attendance today. National Theater was built in 1923 and is on the National Register of Historic Places. It was set to be torn down in 1988 when the historic Richmond Foundation stepped in to save it. Well done. Though not quite as old as the theater, we at the Chesapeake Bay Foundation are celebrating our 50th anniversary. With my 41-year tenure at CBF, I could share countless stories of success and occasional setback. But I'll spare you the details and just share the headlines. The Bay and the James River and all the other rivers in the Chesapeake Bay system are getting better. Virginia is winning the fight for clean water. Now let me be clear. We have a long way left to go. I don't think any of us would dispute that. And Virginia's next governor will be critical to achieving the goal of improved water quality in our bay and in our rivers to make the waters safer and healthier for all Virginians and for future generations. At a time when so much divides us, clean water is a unifier. Bay restoration would not be where it is today were it not for the consistent and bipartisan support of Virginia elected officials. Today, we will hear from two candidates for governor, Lieutenant Governor Ralph Northam and Mr. Ed Gillespie. They will discuss Virginia's path to accelerating water quality improvement. Working together, all of us, with our elected officials, we can reduce pollution and strengthen local communities. Now let me introduce our moderator, Dr. Quentin Kidd. Dr. Kidd is Dean of the College of Social Sciences and Director of the Wasson Center for Public Policy at Christopher Newport University. The Wasson Center was established in 2007 to provide nonpartisan research about public policy issues facing Virginia, and importantly, about citizens' views on those issues. Please welcome Dr. Kidd.
Thank you. Thank you, Will, for that kind introduction. And let me say a few words before we welcome Lieutenant Governor Northam out here. I'm honored to have the privilege to moderate this forum. We're going to hear today from two of the candidates. The forum, as you know, is co-hosted by the Chesapeake Bay Foundation and the James River Association. We're going to hear from first Lieutenant Governor Ralph Northam, and then we're going to hear from Ed Gillespie. The format that the two campaigns have agreed to is a question and answer between each of them and me, with a brief intermission between the two of them on stage. I urge you to listen closely to what each of them has to say, as the forum is intended to give both candidates the opportunity to educate us in the room and the wider voting public on their perspectives on important issues regarding the environment. Please note that the views expressed by the candidates are not those of the sponsoring organizations. As 501c3s, neither sponsoring organization will be endorsing a candidate. This is intended to be an educational event. It looks like we have a pretty full house today, so please be mindful also of everybody's ability to hear, although the sound system seems amazing to me. We're also recording this, and I would also ask you to hold your applause until the end of each candidate being on stage, with the exception of right now when we welcome Lieutenant Governor Northam. Good to be. So given that we have a very short window of time with each candidate, we're going to jump right in. No pleasantries on the campaign trail, right?
That's right.
So Virginia has committed to meeting the pollution reduction goals in the Chesapeake Bay and the James River by 2025 under a very successful state-federal partnership called the Chesapeake Bay Total Maximum Daily Load, or the TMDL, or simply the Blueprint. I just had to say the official name because it needed to be said. The Commonwealth is largely on track to meet those goals, especially because of the state's substantial and sustained support of wastewater treatment upgrades. A revised blueprint that incorporates enhanced and updated Bay data is expected in 2018, and all Bay states will be asked to prepare updated implementation plans. As governor, will you commit to sticking to the blueprint?
Well, the short answer is yes, Quentin, and thank you so much for moderating today. It's great seeing you. Thanks for all the great work that you do across the Commonwealth. And I'd also like to thank the Chesapeake Bay Foundation and James River Association and all the other advocacy groups. We're all in this together. This is a team effort, and we have made a lot of progress, but we still have a lot of work to do. And as I said, I will do everything that I can. I think if you look at my environmental record, you will see that the health of the Chesapeake Bay and rivers and creeks that feed into the bay is certainly very important. And for those of you that don't know, I grew up on Virginia's eastern shore on Onancock Creek. The Chesapeake Bay was literally my backyard. So I remind people, if it can be done on the bay, I have done it, to include working, playing, and actually, since I've been in elected office for the last 10 years, doing everything I can to restore the health of the bay. So, Quentin, as I said, we have made so much progress. There are threats against what we're doing. As I think everybody in here knows, our current administration in Washington has actually threatened to cut funding from the restoration of the Chesapeake Bay. And so we, at the state level, will do everything that we can to protect that. And, we have point sources of pollution in the bay. We've done a lot of work to upgrade our septic systems, very expensive, as you might imagine. So, so when we see people in Washington say that they're going to pull funding away from things like that, it bothers us. And then we, obviously have storm runoff, and we've worked a lot with our developers across the Commonwealth, trying to decrease the runoff that's going into the bay. And then finally with farmers. And I grew up on a small farm on the eastern shore, and most of the farmers are working with us and doing well. There's some still that we have some work to do, but all of those areas are important. And I know you all understand this. We are putting so many of our resources into restoring the health of the bay, but we also need to talk about what's going into the bay and stop some of those things. And those are the three areas, and we need to continue to work in those areas.
Yeah, it's not likely, I think, but let's say that the Trump administration does successfully manage to get cuts to the federal budget that helps as a part of this partnership. Does your support go so far as to thinking through how the Commonwealth of Virginia might pick up some of those cuts?
Absolutely, we have to. We can't go backwards. As we say, we need to look through the windshield and not in our rearview mirror, and to take away some of the things that we have done to risk the health of the bay. And again, I know I'm preaching to the choir, but not only is it important for our quality of life, but it's also important for our economy. And so much depends on people that work on the water. Our tourism industry is doing very well across the Commonwealth of Virginia. So for all of these reasons, in order to have a healthy economy in Virginia, we have to have a healthy Chesapeake Bay and rivers and streams that run into the bay.
Okay. As you know, there's often a tension between environmental protection and economic development. That's sort of the old saw, the tension there. Recognizing that the Chesapeake Bay and the James River are driving forces of Virginia's economy, what is your general view about this balance between water quality, public access, land preservation, and economic development on that very land and that very water? What's the best way to strike this balance?
Well, and I've always been of the mindset to, I don't have a monopoly on ideas, but I am good at bringing people to the table, and it really shouldn't be an us versus them. And most people across the Commonwealth of Virginia, get it now. They, developers understand for property values to be as high as they can. We have to have a clean bay. For people that work on the bay, for our watermen, our tourism industry, all these things are important. So it's all tied in together. And again, it should never be an us versus them. And, one of the things, Quentin, that we are so proud of is, our oyster restoration. And we have a very lively aquaculture industry over on the eastern shore, growing clams and oysters, and that's probably about a $75 million industry. And so we know that if we don't have clean water, that's going to really be threatened. And we've done a good job promoting, and they've been very successful across Virginia, our breweries and our wineries and our distilleries. And so I make the point all the time to people that, if you have tourism and tourists that come into Virginia, and you get some oysters, some good oysters, and a little bit of a good brewed beer or wine, you add those two things together, good things happen, right? So this is why we say Virginia is for lovers. So I just wanted to make sure you all knew that. So, thank you.
I don't have a follow-up to that.
Sorry. That's probably best.
Yeah. Numerous studies have shown that many benefits of outdoor learning, from higher test scores to lower levels of stress amongst children, lower levels of obesity.
Sure.
Collectively, the Chesapeake Bay Foundation and the James River Association provide outdoor education experiences for about 15,000 students and teachers in Virginia each year. Virginia's governors have historically supported environmental education in some way or another, but budget woes last year led to the elimination of the Office of Environmental Education in the Department of Conservation and Recreation. Sure. As governor, would you support the restoration of educational functions performed by the Office of Environmental Education or other partners?
I would, and I actually have a plan for that. I'll just kind of review with you very briefly, but I would like to take this opportunity to just commend the Chesapeake Bay Foundation for building the Brock Environmental Center. And if any of you haven't visited that, it's one of the greenest buildings in the world right now, and so much to be proud of. The point is, though, that it's really a center where we're able to bring classrooms, our students, and just as you said, Quentin, get out there in the environment, get their hands dirty and muddy, and see where crabs and oysters and clams and fish, all these things come from, and also see the importance of that. And so there's tremendous work going on with advocacy groups like Chesapeake Bay Foundation, like James River Association, and these nonprofits need to work in conjunction or collaborate with state agencies. So that's something that I feel very strongly about. And I just need to take this opportunity as part of the plan to recognize my wife, Pam Northam. I made a comment just before I came on the stage that she was the brains behind this operation, and someone reminded me she's the whole package behind this operation. So Pam works with Lynnhaven River now. They are side by side with the Chesapeake Bay Foundation, but we have a golden opportunity, if I'm so honored to be the next governor, to have our First Lady working on a project, and that project will be, or one of them, Pam, I don't know if maybe I talked to you about it before I announced this, but to reestablish the Center for Environmental Education, because it is so important to bring these silos together and promote the health of the Chesapeake Bay and the estuaries, and that's something that we can do through the governor's office. So I have a plan to move forward with that.
So you were talking about reestablishing it?
Yes, absolutely.
Pulling it back into the budget?
Absolutely.
All right. Historical and projected sea level rise is presenting Hampton Roads communities, businesses, and military operations with unprecedented challenges. And Tangier Island is faced with an increasingly existential threat from sea level rise and erosion. As you well know, I think you were there recently. As governor, what specific policy solutions would you propose and support to ensure that our coastal communities, both the densely populated cities and the rural coastal communities, are protected from the effects of sea level rise and recurrent flooding?
Well, I'll try not to be too long-winded, but I used to work on Tangier Island. I used to drive the boat that ferried the men to work every day to repave the airstrip on Tangier Island. And so I know what Tangier looked like back in the late 70s, and I know what it looks like now. And if anybody out there doesn't believe in global warming, climate change, sea level rise, they need to go take a visit to Tangier Island, and they will see that island is literally sinking into the Chesapeake Bay. So knowing what I knew about Tangier, having grown up on the Eastern Shore and now living in Hampton Roads, I knew that sea level rise was going to be a tremendous challenge. And so I was the one that actually introduced the legislation to study that when I was in the Virginia Senate. That was a collaborative effort through Norfolk State, through Old Dominion, through William and Mary, through the VIMS program and a lot of the advocacy groups. And what that did is it established the studies that we could then go and request grants, federal grants. And so we've been able to do that. Just a short story of what we deal with here in Richmond. I talked, when I introduced that particular legislation, about sea level rise, and my friends that I work with in Richmond, most of whom are on the other side of the aisle, said, Ralph, if you mention sea level rise, that equates to climate change, and that's a non-starter. So I went back to the drawing board, and I said, well, maybe if I change the semantics of it, it will be more acceptable. So I went back and rewrote the legislation, and we called it recurrent flooding. And they said, oh, okay, that's fine. So anyway, that's how that process works. And you know what? I would make the point to you today, it's all about having relationships here in Virginia. It's about having experience. It's about agreeing to disagree at the end of the day, and then doing the right thing for Virginia, and we call that the Virginia way. So we were able to do that. And just as Quentin said, sea level rise is not only important for the safety of individuals, it's important for people's property values, for the economy. And then one last thing that is very, very important that we don't talk about sometimes is national security. And the military has a large presence in Hampton Roads. And if we don't address sea level rise and have a resiliency program that they're acceptable of, then they will go elsewhere. And if that happens, it will be very detrimental to our economy in Hampton Roads.
Can I ask you, just to follow up, it seems like such a big problem to me that I even have a hard time getting my mind around specifics. What one or two or three things could we do specifically right now? And I mean, it seems such a big deal. I think a lot of people wonder, well, what can we do?
Well, I think there are a lot of things that we could do. First is to accept it, that it's happening, that it's real. And then as far as planning, I mean, we need to stop building so many developments right by the water, because if every inch of sea level rise affects, and as you all know, in the next 50 years, we may have another foot or two of sea level rise. I actually put in legislation to have natural landscapes or shorelines, things like that. Stop building so many bulkheads so that things are more natural. Using plants that are indigenous to this area, to stop going to things that we're bringing in. So there are a lot of different things, but most of it, Quentin, is I think in order to to deal with any challenge, first of all, you have to accept that there is a challenge, and then set like-minded people down at the table and say, how can we best plan for this? And one of the things that we realize, we need to prevent what's causing sea level rise, and we could talk about renewable energy and wind and solar and those types of things that we'll continue to promote. But it's very expensive to kind of treat the cause, once it's happened. And so it's very expensive. We knew that. That's why I put in the legislation, because we knew we weren't going to be able to do it at the local level or state level, that it was going to take federal grants to do it. So that process started probably about 5 or 6 years ago. And actually, we've made a lot of progress, and we now have some revenue that we can use to address sea level rise.
Mm-hmm. One last brief follow-up on this. You mentioned the federal government. There's the largest naval base in the world.
Yes.
Is there an opportunity for more federal funding, especially on the defense side, to help with this?
Yes, a great question. And our current administration has said that they want to build up the military, which if they do build out the Navy, will be helpful, because we build ships and submarines right there in Newport News. If they could get rid of sequestration, it would be very helpful to our economy in Virginia. If they could avoid another government shutdown, which we dealt with several years ago. So yeah, I think there are a lot of opportunities to do that. But I think that the one thing we need to do is continue to communicate with our congressmen. And I know this is I'd say a nonpartisan issue. Our congressmen that represent areas in Hampton Roads, and I know our U.S. senators, they all believe that we need to deal with sea level rise. So I think it's going to be an all hands on deck, and they just need to encourage our current administration and president that this is something that's very important, and we cannot take funding away from it.
Okay, let me shift. I know there are many other topics. There are two proposed pipelines in the Commonwealth right now, the Mountain Valley Pipeline and the Atlantic Coast Interstate Pipeline. Detractors of the pipelines say they present some environmental risks, impact private landowners, create potential hazards, and perpetuate a dependency on fossil fuels. Supporters say that pipelines will bring jobs to Virginia, provide less expensive natural gas, and will reduce the nation's dependency on foreign energy and on higher emission power sources. As you well know, the pipelines are very controversial. Do you support them? And if so, how do you mitigate the potential negatives of the projects?
Yeah, this is one of those things, Quentin, I have friends on both sides, and I'm with my friends, right? So you've heard that before. But let me just try to put things in perspective. We had a recession in 2007, 2008. Sequestration had a lot to do with that. The government shutdown had a lot to do with it. But we have worked very hard to promote economic opportunity for all Virginians, no matter who you are, no matter where you are, and that is to build the new Virginia economy. Our unemployment rate has gone from 5.4 to 3.7%. It's the lowest that it's been in Virginia in the last 9 years. We're very proud of that, but there are areas in Virginia that are nowhere close to 3.7%. If you go to the Eastern Shore, where I'm from, or the south side of Virginia, or the Southwest, those economies are still hurting in Virginia. And so in order to help businesses grow, and also in order to attract new businesses, new manufacturers to rural Virginia, the cost of energy is important. If we're not competitive with other states, then these companies will go elsewhere. So just kind of keep that in mind. The second thing that we need to realize is that we need to do, and I will do, everything that I can regarding these pipelines to make sure that they're done with science, number one, and I am a scientist, so I believe in science. They need to be done responsibly regarding the environment, and they need to be done with people's property rights in mind. So all of these things need to be taken into account. We are working with the DEQ. That's our state agency. I'm doing everything that I can now through the permitting process, and as governor, I will continue to work in that direction. The DEQ works in conjunction with the Corps of Engineers, so it's a little bit complicated, but at the end of the day, we need to all, and I will lead that effort, to do what is safe and responsible as these pipelines, if they move forward. And I've said if the DEQ does their job, if the Corps of Engineers does their job, if they deem this to be environmentally responsible and safe, then I will support that. If they say, though, that I don't like the way this is affecting our streams, our rivers, we're not going to give those permits out, I would certainly support that as well. It is, I think, inappropriate for someone in my position to usurp the power of our agencies that we have in place, i.e. The DEQ and the Corps of Engineers. So I will do everything I can, as I said earlier, to make sure we move forward in a safe and reliable way.
Okay. I know we're short on time. You've got a busy schedule, so I've got a couple of other questions here. Governor McAuliffe placed a moratorium on new permits related to coal ash disposal until 2018, until next year, and has asked Dominion Energy to present alternatives to storing the materials permanently in the ground near the Chesapeake Bay tributaries. How do you think coal ash, what would you propose? How do you think coal ash should be disposed, and how should it be handled in the Commonwealth?
Well, Quentin, as you know, the governor did request that. He said, let's slow this process down. Let's look at the different methods of enclosing the coal ash, making sure that it can't get into the environment. Let's look at the cost of those, and I certainly supported that. And there are several techniques to deal with coal ash. We're in the process of studying those now, but at the end of the day, as I made the point earlier, we need to stop doing things that are detrimental to the bay and prevent those, and this is a prime example of that. So we put the brakes on that and said, before you go any further with how you're going to deal with coal ash, we need to look at the best way to do it, the safest way to do it, look at the cost effectiveness of it, et cetera, because it's something that we cannot continue to put the coal ash and the carcinogens, other products that come from coal ash into the Chesapeake Bay.
And so essentially it's being studied at this point, and there aren't any solutions on the table other than, all right. No. Offshore drilling in wind farms are a potential eyesore and potential ecological dangers and potential economic boons for the Commonwealth. We're talking about a lot of these double-edged swords here. What is your primary consideration when deciding which which, when, or if ever to support offshore
Well,
wind?
Quentin, I appreciate the question. I don't consider this a double-edged sword. I consider it a no-brainer. And I have probably been, at one time, the only state elected official, and now some others have come on board to advocate against offshore drilling. And let me just give you all a couple reasons. We do want to promote jobs in the Commonwealth of Virginia, but those are the wrong kind of jobs. And so a couple points I would make. We have NASA Wallops up on the eastern shore, which we have used your tax money to support. It's been a tremendous shot economically in the arm for the eastern shore and Virginia. They have tremendous logistical concerns about offshore drilling. We have the military. I just mentioned that earlier, that we have to protect and continue to welcome to Hampton Roads. They also have logistical concerns because they do a lot of training offshore. I mentioned aquaculture earlier. The growing of clams and oysters, a $75 million industry. The last thing that they need is a misadventure off the coast of Virginia. And then finally, Quentin, something that has been so successful, has contributed so much to our economy in Virginia is tourism. And, we just cannot take a chance of polluting or having an oil spill off of our coast, because it would be so detrimental to the tourism industry. So for those reasons, I have always been opposed to offshore drilling. I have also been opposed to fracking in Virginia. I've been opposed to uranium mining, and I will continue to be opposed to those and do everything that I can, again, to be good stewards of the environment. And, my proposal, and we can do this if we work together, is that by 2030, 30% of our energy that's produced in Virginia come from renewable energy. We've made such great progress with wind and solar. We still have a lot of work to do, but just this past 2 years, we have quadrupled the amount of revenue that has come into Virginia from promotion of solar energy. So it can be done. And I would just say to go back and go look at the Brock Environmental Center. If we put our heads together, we can do that. We can be environmentally conscious and build the greenest building, one of the greenest buildings in the world. So it can be done, and I'll continue to promote that as the next governor. So thank you.
So you sort of segued into what I was going to offer you at the end. These are questions that I thought were important about the environment. Other people thought were important. Is there anything that you think is important that we're missing just in the last few minutes on stage here?
How many minutes do we have?
Well, you can have as long as you want, really, probably.
Well, I think what I would say is that if someone is going to apply for a job, look at their record and their track record. And I am very proud of what I have been able to do to restore the health of the Bay. And as I said, we still have a lot of work to do. The first thing that I did was I wrote a letter to our VMRC and requested and encouraged them to stop dredging crabs in the southern part of the Bay during the winter. That was not popular in my district with some of the watermen, but I thought it was the right thing to do, and it has been the right thing to do because our crab stocks have recovered. I also co-patron legislation to take the phosphorus out of our fertilizers. As you all know, in order to form algae, you have to have phosphorus and nitrogen. And so I co-patroned that several years ago when I was in the Senate, again, to make the Chesapeake Bay healthier. The last thing I would say is that I'm an ambassador for Virginia and for the Chesapeake Bay, and I go around and I talk to a lot of groups, especially civic leagues, about being good stewards of our environment. And I just want to share this story on my way out. I was with a civic league one evening in Northam, and I was talking to them about fertilizing your yard, and that, when you put all this fertilizer down and the next rainstorm comes, it goes into our drainage systems, right into the Chesapeake Bay, algae blooms form, et cetera, et cetera. It's not good for the health of the Bay. And everybody, just kind of like this audience, was, yeah, that sounds good. And so I took my seat, and the president of the Civic League stood up, and he had a certificate. The certificate was for the greenest yard of the month. So we still have work to do. We have to get out there and educate people and make sure that they know the importance of the health of our Chesapeake Bay, and we're all in this together. So thank you all so much for being here today, and I look forward to working with you in the next 4 years. Thank you all so much.
Thank you. Thank you. Appreciate it very much. We welcome Mr. Ed Gillespie to stage.
Thank you. Thanks, Quentin.
Welcome.
Thank you.
So So I think,
Let me just make sure my phone is turned
yeah, I
off.
was gonna,
There we go. Please do the same.
that's right. That happens to me in classes a lot. The phones will go off, right? Okay, so since we're short on time, we're going to jump right into this. Virginia has committed to meeting pollution reduction goals in the Chesapeake Bay and the James River by 2025 under a very successful state-federal partnership called the Chesapeake Bay Total Maximum Daily Load, the blueprint, essentially. The Commonwealth is largely on track to meet those goals, especially because of the state's substantial and sustained support for wastewater treatment upgrades. A revised blueprint that incorporates enhanced and updated Bay data is expected in 2018, and all Bay states will be asked to prepare updated implementation plans. As governor, will you commit to sticking with the blueprint?
Yeah, well, the midpoint assessment will come, obviously, in the first year of the next governorship, and getting that information is going to be, critical to determining how we continue to meet these goals. The TMDL has been successful in helping us meet our goals and make progress, and we need to stay the course in that regard and stay consistent to make sure that we're doing everything we can to clean up the Chesapeake Bay. I'm committed to it, and if I can just exercise a little bit, I know we jumped right into it, but I do want to thank you, Quentin, and thank the James River Association, Chesapeake Bay Foundation, not just for hosting this forum, but for everything that you do in helping us to make sure that we're ensuring the integrity and the cleanliness of the Bay, which is critically important to us. And I'm not just saying that to suck up to my hosts here today, not that I'm above that kind of thing, but it's true, and I would work very closely with these groups to continue making that progress. And I guess I would just say, that is very important to me. I spent a lot of time on the Eastern Shore. I was on Tangier a couple of weeks ago, and on our peninsulas, and the Chesapeake Bay is it is not just a huge asset. From my perspective, God has entrusted us with this beauty and this gem and this resource to be good stewards of it, and it would be a priority for me, and the TMDL and the midpoint assessment, making sure that we're doing everything we can to continue to clean up the Bay and meet those goals would be a priority for me as governor.
Okay, so just a brief follow-up. As you well know, the president has proposed cutting funding, EPA funding, some of the Chesapeake Bay funding. Personally, I'm not sure that that's actually going to get through Congress, but if it were, does your commitment carry to the point that we would be looking at, making up some of those priorities through state budgets?
I'd be open to that, obviously. I think we're going to get that funding restored. Sure. We cannot zero out the Chesapeake Bay Cleanup Fund, and I will do everything in my power as governor of the Commonwealth of Virginia to make sure we don't. And I think, frankly, the relationships I would bring to bear could be very helpful to us in that regard. I know Scott Pruitt. I know Mick Mulvaney. I think I can help and would work with our delegation, bipartisan support for making sure we restore that funding. We need to restore that funding. I believe when you see the federal budget in its final form and the appropriations, that funding is going to be restored. But if there's a gap, depending on the size of it and how manageable it is, obviously, and we needed to help fill that gap, it is of such a priority that I would look to find that money in our state budget. But I don't believe we're going to need to. I really believe we're going to get that funding restored at the federal level.
Okay. As you know, there is often a tension between environmental protection and economic development. Recognizing that the Chesapeake Bay and the James River are driving forces in Virginia's economy, what is your general view about the balance between water quality, public access, and land preservation, and economic development on that water and land? What is the best way to strike that balance in your view?
Well, this is in some ways not math or science. It's getting the judgment right. And, to me, it's not a competing demand. I unveiled a plan a couple weeks ago, and I'm constantly unveiling policy proposals. Would encourage people to go to my website. You can see this plan for the outdoor dominion, for making Virginia the #1 destination on the East Coast for outdoor recreation. And we should be, because of the Bay, because of the rivers and the streams and the mountains and the lakes and our natural beauty. Virginia should be #1. And Right now, we're not anywhere near it. In fact, North Carolina, across our border, their outdoor recreation economy and their GDP is about a little over $28 billion. Ours is $21 billion. I'm sure there aren't any North Carolinians here, but if there are, no offense, but we're more beautiful than they are, and we should be number one on the East Coast, and I really believe that. And so I propose in that plan a lot of conservation and preservation. I want to get the Clinch River State Park done during the course of my governorship. I want to have 50 more inputs or put-ins, a lot of people say, for canoes and kayaks and boats on our lakes and rivers and streams. I think that's important to economic development and economic opportunity for us to continue to be have such natural beauty. It's an asset. Natural beauty is an economic asset for us. And so preserving that, protecting that, I don't find to be in competition with economic development. Now, I know in terms of, development and things like that, there are areas we've got to preserve. I'm as folks probably know, a conservative. And the same root word for conservationist. And we need to conserve, and we need to preserve, and we need to protect. And so I know there are times when there's a strain, and we have to get the balance right. But to my mind, if done right, these policies for conservation, preservation, outdoor recreation, which, by the way, would be thousands of jobs, are not in conflict. They are much in complement.
It often gets reduced down to that
does.
sort of the contest.
And look, let me just say this. I think a lot of that sometimes, there's natural tension. I'm not minimizing. There's always going to be some natural tension. But I also think that when you can bring stakeholders together, a lot of times there's a lot more common ground than people realize. And that if you're willing to put the time in, make it a priority, bring people together and say, look, let's find, and we've seen this in easements and conservation grants and things like that, where we've been able to get the development community and the business community and the conservationist community together to find common solutions. I think there's a lot more of that to be had.
Great. Okay. Shifting on to a different topic, numerous studies have shown that the many benefits of outdoor learning, from higher test scores to lower levels of stress and obesity amongst children, collectively, the Chesapeake Bay Foundation and the James River Association provide outdoor educational experiences for over 15,000 students and teachers in Virginia each year. Virginia's governor has historically supported environmental education in some way or another, but budget woes last year led to the elimination of the Office of Environmental Education in the Department of Conservation and Recreation. As governor, would you support the restoration of educational functions performed by that office and its partners?
Yes. Yeah. Where on the flow chart and that kind of thing, right. I'm not exactly sure. I know the functions you're talking about, though, and we need those functions, and I'm supportive of those functions, and they do serve an important purpose. It's one of the points I made in my outdoor recreation plan for the Outdoor Dominion, by the way, and I got the website, outdoordominion.com. I'm going to give that to the Commonwealth of Virginia after November 7, because we need to use that to promote outdoor recreation. And one of the points I make is it's not just the jobs and the tax revenue and the GDP impact that it has. The impact on public health, and for young people in particular, and to have a healthier Virginia is important. And so this education, I think, is an important function of our government. Let me make one other point, if I might, Quentin, and it's a little bit of a digression, but I think it's an important one. One of the reasons we face these funding strains is because of a lack of economic growth in the Commonwealth of Virginia, economic stagnation. And so let me just pull the lens back a little bit and say one of the most important things we can do to help fund programs like that and have the resources and the revenue for them is to get our economic growth rate up from 0.6%, 39th out of 50 states in the country, to where we rightly belong, which is to be number one in economic growth. I truly believe that too, in economic growth and job creation, and that would help us meet some of the concerns relative to funding for important programs like this. But I don't think that should be lost in it, and I mention it everywhere. I know what our focus is here today, but when you pull back the lens a little bit, I do think that going from 0.6% to 3.5% economic growth and going from 39th in the country to first in the country in economic growth will help us meet a lot of these needs over time. So I just wanted to put a plug in for my economic plan too.
Yeah, fair enough, fair enough. Historical and projected sea level rise is presenting Hampton Roads communities, businesses, and military operations with unprecedented challenges, as you well know. And Tangier Island, where you were recently, is faced with an increasingly existential threat from sea level rise and erosion. As governor, what specific policy solutions would you propose and support to ensure that our coastal communities, and I'm talking about both densely populated cities and rural coastal communities, are protected from the effects of sea level rise and recurrent flooding?
Okay, let me talk about Tangier. First of all, they need erosion protection and they need a seawall on the other side of the island that has been pending for some time, and I would work hard to make sure we got the core money for that and got that built. We've got to preserve Tangier Island. And I was with Uka Rescue, who's kind of famous, if folks are familiar with him, from 60 Minutes, and he feels strongly about this. I do too. But then in terms of sea level rise, I actually have a plan. If you go to my website, edforvirginia.com/sea level rise, I put forward a plan a couple weeks ago. Here's a hard copy of it, to deal with sea level rise and recurrent flooding. And it includes proposals for more affordable flood insurance. Now that addresses the effect, not the sea level rise itself. But look, Hampton Roads, Norfolk, we are second only to New Orleans in terms of the impact of sea level rise and land subsiding. And we have got to address it. And it is not just a threat to property value and homes. It is a concern for our BRAC readiness, for the Base Closure and Realignment Commission and that process, which I suspect we're going to see another one in the not too distant future. And if at Eustis Langley and Norfolk and Oceana and other places we have this recurrent flooding and we have sea level rise and our personnel are not able to get to the bases, we're going to be vulnerable. And so it is a BRAC readiness issue as well. And so sea level rise is a priority for me. I put forward this specific plan to address it, including infrastructure aspects of it. What William and Mary and VIMS and ODU are doing, I think is very, very important. We need to foster that and encourage that. The Netherlands has been dealing with this for some time. For them, they are exporting now the technology to deal with sea level rise, the intellectual property to deal with sea level rise, and they are a leader in Europe and Asia. I think that we in Virginia can be leaders in coming up with the solutions, the technologies, the practices that we can then also market, frankly, from the work that's being done at ODU and VIMS and William and Mary. But I've got a whole plan.
Can you talk just about one or two of the specifics of your plan, and also, are there opportunities for federal funding? You talked a lot about the military bases. Are there opportunities for federal funding through DoD funding, for example, that would help the region as well?
We're going to need federal funding. We're not going to be able to address this concern at the local level and or the state level. We're going to need to work. It's got to be a federal level, a state level, and working with the cities in Hampton Roads as well. And that is part of my plan, actually. And DoD does have an interest here. And we want to work with them in that regard. But there's other things, just in terms of, for example, any capital outlays that we make as a state in this area. We need to measure what is the effect that such capital outlays would have. Is it going to make the prospect of sea level rise worse or better? And that needs to be a factor before we make capital outlays as a state. We do need to help folks there in terms of flood insurance, and it's got to be something that we are looking at holistically across a number of departments and agencies, VDOT and VDEM and a lot of other of our departments and agencies. And so I would have in my cabinet someone tasked with the responsibility and the priority of addressing sea level rise and recurrent flooding. And by the way, the recurrent flooding problem is not limited to our east. It is a problem in our west, in our valleys, with our streams and our rivers, and we've got to address it there as well.
Okay. On to a different topic. There are two proposed pipelines in the Commonwealth right now, the Mountain Valley Pipeline and the Atlantic Coast Interstate Pipeline. Detractors of the pipelines say that they present environmental risks, impact private landowners, create potential safety hazards, and perpetuate a dependency on fossil fuels. Supporters say the pipelines will bring jobs to Virginia, provide less expensive natural gas, and will reduce the nation's dependency on foreign energy and on higher emissions power sources. As you well know, the pipelines are very controversial. Do you support them? And if so, how do you mitigate the potential negatives of these two projects?
I do support them. I think concerns about private property and environmental impact are legitimate, and I think we can address those concerns. In fact, I think we must address those concerns, and in fact, it is law that we address those concerns, and we need to comply with the law. But I believe that we can build that infrastructure in a way that is environmentally sensitive and protective of private property rights. To your point, Quentin, the natural gas is plentiful, it's affordable. It's important to us in our economy to get our economic growth rate going again, to have reliable sources of affordable energy here. Natural gas, cleaner burning than coal, although coal is making some progress. We need to encourage coal to continue to make progress in being cleaner burning and cleaner in terms of its impact on the air. But natural gas is an affordable, plentiful resource for us, and it is cleaner burning. And I'm supportive of it because if we're going to foster greater job creation, advanced manufacturing, and the ability for us to have good paying jobs in the Commonwealth of Virginia, we need to have a stable, reliable source of affordable energy, and the Mountain Valley and Atlantic Coast pipelines will help provide that for us.
Speaking of coal, Governor McAuliffe placed a moratorium on new permits related to coal ash disposal until 2018, until next year, and has asked Dominion Energy to present alternatives to storing the materials permanently in the ground near the Chesapeake Bay and its tributaries. How do you think coal ash disposal should be handled in the Commonwealth? What would be your plan, thoughts and plans?
I support the moratorium. We're not using this as a dodge. We do have, in the same way we've got the midpoint assessment coming, we do have our agencies, DEQ and others, looking at the coal ash question and to make recommendations on how best to address that. And it's something we've got to come together and we've got to figure out. And so I would want to get a little more information. Let this, while the moratorium is in place, let the agencies do their evaluation, do an appraisal of what is the best way to address the coal ash situation. And I'd want to hear from them before. I do not have an answer here today on that, because there's a lot of very smart people with a lot of different perspectives, evaluating what is the best approach here, and I'm very eager and open to hearing those recommendations as governor.
Okay, I think that's a fair enough answer. One other question, and I'll give you the opportunity to tell me if I've missed anything. Offshore drilling and offshore wind farms are potential eyesores, potential ecological dangers, and potential economic boons also for the Commonwealth. What is your primary consideration when deciding which, if either, to support or not support?
You said offshore wind farms and
I said offshore drilling and offshore wind farms. I sort of combine them together.
Well, I am an all-of-the-above person, in terms of having diversified energy sources in the Commonwealth of Virginia and also good-paying jobs. The fact is, I am supportive of development of our deep-sea coast and having that option for us in Virginia. The truth is, when you look at the economics of it, and the fact that seismic tests and things like that are very out of date, I mean, we wouldn't be looking at that anytime soon. I would like to preserve that option for the Commonwealth of Virginia for offshore development of our oil and gas resources. But because of what we just talked about, the affordability and the shale revolution in natural gas, and the plentiful supply on land and the cost of the testing and the development off the deep sea coast, it's very, very unlikely that we would see it, even if we could. Now the turbines and the wind are a different situation. We made a lot of progress in terms of the cost efficiency of that. Transmission still somewhat of an issue in terms of cost efficiency, but I'm for diversifying our energy portfolio in Virginia, and I would like to see us be able to do more in terms of wind. But you know, we have the tourism industry now. I think they can be far enough offshore that we can address those concerns. But going back to the point about BRAC and the Navy and the concerns about the Navy ships and their concerns, you know, we'd have to meet those concerns as well. And again, I'm for diversifying the energy portfolio in Virginia, but that's something where you'd also have to get the balance right. I suspect there are folks here from Hampton Roads and Norfolk and Virginia Beach, and you know, if the Navy says that this is a problem for our carriers, that's a problem for us, and we need to, you know, to work with them to mitigate those concerns.
Mm-hmm. So these are a set of questions that I and others thought were important to the environmental policy in Virginia. But what have we missed? You've thought a lot about this.
You know, I mean, if you look at my, I bought another plan here for folks to look at. You know, the outdoor Dominion plan, also my agriculture and forestry plan, which ties in obviously to conservation and clean water and how we address that. And you'll see in terms of the best management practices relative to TMDL and things there, I've got a thoughtful approach to the cost sharing with our agriculture sector in that regard. I came out in my energy plan, which I unveiled a couple weeks ago. It's probably worth mentioning here. I am opposed to uranium mining in the Commonwealth. I think it's a risk to our water supply, and that the benefit to us from economic development and growth and energy is not worth that risk. So I thought that might be something folks here might appreciate. And I guess I would say, Quentin, you know, if you look at all these policies, including the ones we've talked about here today, in my agriculture and forestry policy, my energy policy relative to diversifying our portfolio, not mining uranium here because of the tailings and the risk to the water supply. You know, I've tried to take a very thoughtful approach and a balanced approach, and I pride myself in listening to people. I do believe that the Chesapeake Bay we are blessed with it, and we're blessed with natural beauty all across the Commonwealth. I always say, I feel bad for candidates who have to run in states that aren't Virginia because the natural beauty that we have everywhere. But the Chesapeake Bay is a treasure. I believe we have been entrusted with it, and that we have a responsibility to be good stewards of it, to keep it clean. It is very important for our economy. I mentioned outdoor recreation. Let me mention the watermen. And you know, I had reason a little over a year ago to be in New York City before I had started my campaign full time, and I was in a restaurant there, and for I think it was for business, but on the menu, Virginia oysters. And you know, we have, you know, the oysters and the clams and the crabs and the, you know, our aquaculture sector and our watermen, you know, having clean tributaries and a clean Chesapeake is very important to them as well, as much as it is, you know, in many ways, to my mind, a moral, you know, obligation. It is smart economics. And we want, I mean, Virginia oysters are getting to be like California wine, you know, in terms of the brand. We want that brand, the Tangier oysters and the Lynn Haven oysters, and we want people to know when, Cherry Stone clams, you know, they want seafood from the Virginia Chesapeake. That's good for us. That's good for our economy. It's good for jobs. But, you know, I guess my point is, it's not just about the beauty and the responsibility to keep it clean, that if you're a conservationist, that you know is your obligation and the stewardship that we've been entrusted with. It also has a lot to do with jobs in the economy. And that was, to my earlier point, I don't see a necessary strain and tension that some people see. I see a complementary policy approach here that can work for all Virginians. So I guess I would just point those things out.
Great. Well, our time is up. I know you've got a busy campaign schedule, so I want to thank you very much for being here today.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you both very much. Thank you, Quentin Kidd, for facilitating our discussion with each of the candidates. My name is Bill Street. I'm the CEO of the James River Association, and I am privileged to close up our program today. I'd also like to thank each of the candidates, Ed Gillespie and Ralph Northam, for being with us today. It was great to hear them speak directly to the issues affecting the James River and the Chesapeake Bay. Let's have a bigger round of applause for both of them again. As the top state official for the Commonwealth, the Governor of Virginia plays a paramount role in ensuring the health of the James River, the Chesapeake Bay, and all of Virginia's waters. Over the past 4 administrations, both Democrat and Republican, Virginia has invested an average of $337 million in water quality programs per governor term. $337 million. We need to continue that level of commitment and investment in order to achieve a fully healthy James River and a saved bay. Mr. Gillespie and Mr. Northam, or Lieutenant Governor Northam, we urge you to make clean water a top priority for your campaigns. I'd also like to thank all of you who attended our Clean Water Forum today, all of you watching online, the live streaming, as well as those who may watch this by tape at a later date. Water is our most precious national resource and touches our daily lives as the water we drink. It's also a major driver for our economy and quality of life. It's what defines the places where we live, and its importance will only increase in the future as we place more pressure on it. Because of the universal need for it, clean water has always been a bipartisan issue and a core function of government in Virginia, as reflected in Article 11 of the state constitution, which establishes natural resource protection and conservation as one of the only 2 specific charges of state government. Like past administrations, the next governor will face many competing needs and interests and conflicting priorities. It's very helpful today to hear how each of the major candidates will view these important issues affecting our waterways. I hope that you've enjoyed learning about their views, experience, and their plans, and will take that into consideration when casting your ballot come November. Virginia has a strong track record and has been a leader in improving the health of its waters. Over the 4 decades that the James River Association has been working to improve the health of the James River, we've seen the river transform from one of the nation's most polluted rivers to one of its most improved, earning a B- in the latest State of the James River report and enabling Richmond to become Outside Magazine's best river town ever. We need to ensure that momentum continues with our next governor. And I want to close with one final thought. When the James River was so polluted 40 years ago, it divided us. The communities up and down the river used the river as the dividing line and turned their backs to the river. And now that the river is healthy again, it's a great attraction. It's bringing people together. In fact, the James River Park System here in Richmond is the top destination in the Richmond region by far. Over 1.4 million visitors a year. And it's all walks of life that come together, all ages, all races, all income levels, and all nationalities. A polluted river divides us, but a healthy river unites us. And we could all use a little bit more unity right now. So let's make sure the next governor keeps us on the path to clean water and healthy water that brings us all together.